So Amelia, thank you very much. That was great. And I think you're gonna self-moderate, as it were.
Yes, yes, I will self-moderate, and I will keep an eye, and hopefully I will do this right in terms of question. Steve, you're up first.
Oh, and my question is about vegetarianism versus veganism. And I want to push you on that. And just a little background. You mentioned at some point that you'd been a vegan for 10 years.
Yeah.
I've been a vegetarian for well over 50 years. I'm not going to go into the well part, but a long time. And even as a vegetarian, have been a quasi-vegan. Rarely do I eat eggs or any other animal products, but there are also some non-animal products that I won't eat. And it has to do with things like what's necessary to produce those goods. And I remember distinctly being at a conference. It was in Champaign, Illinois, the University of Illinois. And I was at a conference and somebody was presenting on how cashew nuts were produced. And it was absolutely horrid. And they used young kids and the conditions were abominable. And this must have been 20 or 25 years ago. And since then there's no word for it. So we'll call it an anti-cashewitarian.
No, absolutely.
And so, you know, in some senses, especially eggs, where you have chickens that are not living in cages and roaming freely, I don't see any big problem with that, especially compared to something like what's required to harvest cashew nuts and eat cashew nuts.
Right. Well, you don't need to eat cashew nuts, and you definitely don't need to eat eggs either. In terms of, now, one of the things that we do talk about in the book is also the exploitation in the plant agriculture, because lots of it exists. And in particular, I'm really familiar with what happens in Italy in terms of the soft fruits, the soft red fruits in particular, with the migrant exploitation and so forth. There's absolutely, I mean, we have to know about our food system. And it doesn't mean that if you're vegan, you're somehow excused from knowing all these things. But in terms of animal use, and in terms of eggs and in terms of dairy, those things involve the actual death and exploitation of a tremendous number of animals. Eggs, even when you get this idea that they are free ranging and so on, free ranging doesn't mean what you think it means. Number one. Number two, the chickens, they live horrible lives, even if they are running around freely, in which they're not. They're still in these little tiny super cramped houses, essentially, but they're on the ground with artificial light that keeps them producing over and over and over again. And then they eventually all end up in the exact same slaughterhouses as the quote unquote meat animals. So and same happens to dairy cows. Dairy cows live about 20 years. No, cows live about 20 years. Dairy cows live about 5, because once they are spent, meaning once they can no longer produce the babies and they are, as females, they are useless, they are brought to the same exact slaughterhouses as the slaughterhouses that make steaks out of cows. And there is a saying that there is as much, if not more, suffering in a glass of milk and in a fried egg than there is in a steak, because it's a repeated and continuous cycle. With that said, absolutely, cashews can be problematic depending on where they come from. There's all sorts of things that are problematic, but in one, you're absolutely contributing to the death of billions of animals, and the other one is you're not, well, yes, you are complicit in supporting and continuing to support an unjust agricultural system, but you're not actually sending people to the slaughterhouse on a regular basis. I mean, you know, um, that is a reality. Henry, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you, first of all, for the nice, interesting presentation. I enjoyed it, and a couple of practical questions. First, how about the people, I would say Aboriginal people, let's say Inuits living in Canada, who have no choice but to hunt and eat animals? What are they supposed to do? How will they survive?
Well, most of us here are not Inuit, and most of us here are not living in places and where we don't have access to non-animal foods and vegan-friendly foods. Having said that, I actually know vegans who are up in Alaska who are in very well, weather extreme locations. And actually they're able to grow really fantastic vegetables because of the longer light periods during the summer. And with respect to what indigenous people do and their practices, in terms of animal killing, that isn't actually an exception. Everybody on the planet does it. So there isn't anything particularly cultural about killing animals and using them as objects, because literally everybody on the planet does it. There's different ways and different seasonings. There's different ways that there are ceremonies and things like that. But ultimately, there isn't any difference between any human on this planet, because we have all been doing it for 10,000 years. We've all been exploiting animals for about 10,000 years. So whether our ethical practice is based on an outlier who may or may not actually be able to do something different than what they are doing, or can choose to do something different, is a marginal case. It doesn't actually affect everybody else.
Yeah, let's agree that let's live in this in peace. Let's agree they're an exception. How about pets? Dogs,
What?
cats, pets.
Oh, right. So companion animals. Again, actually dogs are omnivorous, and they can, well, two things. Once again, what other animals, what we do with other animals, and actually the whole question of domestication is itself fraught in ethical considerations. And I actually have I have a discussion about that in one of my in season 2 of the podcast. So there's all sorts of, that's a whole other hour discussion, but nevertheless, so it's domestication itself, there's loads of ethical considerations there. With respect to the animals that we are in charge of, in terms of, like, so for example, my cats, you can see one of them behind me. I am responsible for their well-being. They are in this liminal space where they are not really, they can't really be wild, because the wilderness is not really a wilderness anymore. It's not really a place for them anymore, and it's not really it's really also, so they're stuck in a liminal place. So I have to take care of them. I have to do the best I can for them. So there are some vegan cat foods. There's plenty of vegan dog food, because dogs are omnivorous, so they will absolutely thrive on a vegan diet. And I know many vegan dogs, and they're vegan people. And I also know some vegan cats. Having said that, their food, so they are a little bit older, and they are now on a renal diet, a special renal diet, and the principal ingredient of that renal diet is pea protein, and this is like Royal Canin, so completely non-vegan, you know, a non-vegan regular brand that you get at the vets or from whoever you get your pet food from. So
sorry.
the
I'm
the
just sorry,
primary,
wondering how people who have no means to provide vegan food for their cats and dogs, how they're going, what kind of solution they're going to find. Because, well, you have this opportunity, wonderful. That's your vegan cat is probably the best cat in the world. But the most of the people in this world have no possibility to do that. I live in a very poor country, for example. Chickens roam free here, by the way.
okay.
Some numerous cows, and I can't imagine what's going to happen if they stop being milked. These cows. I'm not talking about the murder of cows, because I don't support any murder of animals. But stop milking cows is going to be a real disaster for them.
Well, for the most part, we inseminate the cows, so we are actually making more cows, and we are creating more and more cows, and we are inseminating them and creating them, and so on and so on and so on. So that there are chickens running around and there are cows running around. I've just spent about 5 weeks in Nepal and India, and I've been to many countries. Animals that roam freely generally are not the healthiest, and there is quite a bit of neglect and so forth. But again, why do we have the right to use them as objects? We have decided that we have that right as humans because we have decided that. And it's a self-serving decision. We have decided because that's what we're doing, and that's what we decided to do 10,000 years ago, and that's what we do. But we have no real right to do that. And that's what I think we have to really look at. Again, it's not about treatment. It's not about whether they get to live wherever they want to live. Well, they should live wherever they want to live. We shouldn't be making more cows because they didn't ask to make more cows, and so on. But let me just go on, and Shishir, I think you're next.
Before Shishir will
Yeah.
excuse me, I know, because he's always gracious. I just wanted to clarify, you know, where Henry lives. Henry lives in a very remote part, I think it's fair to say, of Costa Rica, right? And you have a very nice dog who I know well. So as a practical matter,
Yeah.
what should Henry do about the dog?
He lives in Costa Rica. Oh, that's a wonderful country with amazing food. You have amazing agriculture. You have amazing land that grows so much things. There's people who you can feed a dog is an omnivore. They can eat the exact same things that you can, with some exceptions. They can't eat onions. They can't eat garlic. And there's a few other things that dogs shouldn't really be eating. So you could actually prepare rice and beans, for example, for your dog with some carrots and some other things. Things that you would eat yourself. On a very simple diet that is not an expensive diet, that is a very basic diet. The dog could also eat that. But again, what the dog eats and what the cat eats doesn't actually have an effect on whether we have a moral obligation to be vegan, whether there's a moral imperative to be vegan. That's a part of the consideration once we have made our own decision, and once we have explored that concept. And again, when we're talking about cost and what poor people can afford and what poor people cannot, the issue isn't about vegan food. Poverty is the issue. Poverty affects every single thing that you do in your life. It affects everything. It affects how you think. It affects how you deal with. You're stressed all the time. So actually, it's an economics and a class system that we need to talk about if we're talking about poverty. Poverty is unacceptable. In 2023, there should be no poverty anywhere. Full stop.
please tell us about insects. Are they
And
part?
absolutely same. Why do we need that? We got lentils, we got beans, we got a wide variety. Why do we, and you know, I didn't even get into talking about zoonotic diseases, but every single disease, including what we call childhood diseases, you know, and that we think like, oh, that's so cute, it's a childhood disease. No, that actually means you had to survive that in order to become an adult, because it pretty much killed you. You know, measles, mumps, rubella, every single influenza we've ever had, time immemorial, all of those are zoonotic diseases, all of those, as well as the ones that we are really familiar now, tuberculosis, HIV, obviously COVID, and all the other bird flus that are coming. So we haven't
Okay.
even talked about that, but yeah.
Good, thank you.
And what wild animals do, that's a whole other separate discussion as well. But actually, I have a very interesting guest coming in season 2. Shishir, I think you're next. I'm not sure about the time. I'm actually not keeping track of that. So John, let me know if I'm overrunning.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, we've got plenty of time so far.
Okay.
My apologies to you, Shasir. I did derail that whole thing, but as I say, you'll forgive me, as I'm sure.
Oh, no, never forgive you, ever. Listen, thank you very, very much, Amelia. I was very impressed how you made such a complex subject sound simple, which is always a wonderful way to get a message across. You address the environment, you address the ethics, you address the health and the diet. And as humans, we somehow feel like we're at the top of the pyramid and we have the special status that we can make a decision who lives and who dies when we feed ourselves. So I come from a vegetarian family and have been for many years. And yes, my pets did get vegetarian food and they did live and survive well. So Henry, don't worry too much about the dog. He will get fed. But having said that, I also was a little distraught when you started talking about the males getting sent to slaughter as soon as they're born. Well, that was very unsettling for, I think, the guys amongst us.
Yeah, it's a
Well-
terrible thing. I didn't know about it either, but it's true. There's a couple of different methods, which I won't get into because it's distressing.
And I also
yeah.
love the analogies that you drew from the human differences in the human hierarchies and how the kind of laddering that happens is so very well illustrated in the way we treat our animals. And the females, you certainly brought that to my attention, loud and clear. The injustices that we as humans can not only dish out on those people that we call slave labor, but we certainly dish it out in volumes when it comes to animals. There I agree. And their desire to live. You mentioned that sentience is defined by the desire to live. I don't know where we draw that line about desire to live, whether it's from a male to a female, from a white person to a black person. Is it from a man to an animal? Is it also, as Henry was going, is it also true for insects? And if it is, that we are kind and compassionate for the insects and we don't tread on them, then I'm going to take it one step further and say, where do you draw that line? And say, I can't eat this cucumber. It also wanted to live.
Well, except that they don't have a central nervous system, which is
so
quite fundamental. Well, no, we are talking about animals. We're talking about animals, and that's why I talked about plants. So we talk about animals. Animals have a central nervous system. They run away. If you're, like if you're looking at a bee, the bee flies away. They don't want to, they have their own system of what they do. Some of them are solitary, some of them live in a hive. And so you have animals, we have central nervous systems. Hold on, let me just finish this thought. And then you have plants. Plants are alive and they have complex systems. They react to stimuli like the sun, like, you know, the sunflower moves around, but the sunflower moves around because it automatically does that. Now, two things. Manisha Dekka has the concept of beingness, and it says, you know, even we need to give that a different kind of consideration, where we need to consider plants. And I was talking about that, and I would say, absolutely, we do need to give consideration to plants. But if we eat animal products, and that includes dairy and eggs, if we eat animal products, we're killing a hell of a lot of plants in order to get the same nutrients that we can just get from the plants. And in terms of efficiency of land use, eating plants actually uses a lot less land than does growing the plants to feed to the animals that we're then going to kill to then get the nutrients therefrom. So you have that. You know, there isn't a perfect, you know, we are not animals who can get nutrients from the air like some plants can. We can't do that. So we have to get it from plants, and we get it directly from the plants rather than going through the animal. The animal gets all of their nutrients from plants, the plants that they eat. So in terms of sentience, the sentience with respect to an animal is that desire to live. And that desire to live is demonstrated by, you go after, I mean, you know, my cats, one of them is very skittish. He's 14, they're 14 years old. I've been feeding them every day for their 14 years of their life. He still in the morning runs away from me because he's on some level scared, right? So if you're going after an animal, that animal's going to run away. Or if another animal's going after an animal, that animal is going to run away. They're going to run away. Their desire to live is absolutely evident and consistent.
So if I can just add a couple of things to what
Yeah.
you said. Yes, there is no central nervous system in plants, but they certainly, and we can call it instinct. Sure, we can call it anything because we call a lot of behavior of animals as instinct. They don't rationally think like we do. So does that give them an exclusion? Plants also have shown intelligence. Recent book shows how trees have helped other plants survive around them by diverting their rooting systems so that the other plants are able to reach out and get their nutrients. If that is the case, they are showing certain degree of intelligence, perhaps far superior to ours, who knows? It's a question of where do we draw that line as to say, I can't
You
eat
draw the
meat.
line at the animals, first and foremost. You have to, because that, you know, for sure, they don't want to die. So you feed a sheep, right? I live in a very rural area, very poor and rural area in the north of Scotland. There's sheep all around me. These sheep are used to their person who comes and feed them. The sheep have come to trust this person. This person will eventually betray that trust and bring them over, put them on a truck and bring them over to the slaughterhouse. 100%. But you know, when we go out to mow the lawn, we go out and mow the lawn. The lawn is not screaming in pain. Yes, absolutely. The interconnections between fungi and trees is mind-blowing. And I'm actually involved in a rewilding project, and I've been working with a mycologist who it really blows my mind. Lichens also blow my mind. And there is a complexity, and there is certain different levels of beingness that we have to consider. But ultimately, for us to live, if we're talking about the less harm, even to the plants themselves, if you have to say, well, I accept someone or something has to die, and that death has to be from a plant, at least when you are just eating plants, you're consuming a much smaller number and generating a lot less harm than you would do when you are eating animal products. At least, you know, on a killing a sentient. So now I think Heather was next. If it works this way, I as I'm seeing it, hopefully I'm getting it right.
Yeah. Okay. So Henry already asked a bunch of my questions, so thank you, Henry. But I was interested in your take on, or vegan take on a few other things. One is, okay, because you said something about not visiting zoos. So what's the distinction between having pets and visiting a zoo?
Well, the zoos are, you're imprisoned. Actually, domestication is hugely problematic. Let me start with that. So it is hugely problematic. We have created this liminal space for animals, and we don't really have a place for them anymore, other than in the context of ourselves. And then plenty are abandoned, and plenty live on the streets and are miserable and diseased, and it's awful. Zoos, we actually take the animals from the wild or make them reproduce so we have more, and then we put them in cages and use them as profit-making centers. At least with respect to rescue animals, and I'm definitely not talking about buying pets, because that's a whole other ghastly industry. You are providing shelter and refuge and sanctuary to two animals who would have died or who would have been euthanized. So
Okay, but
it's that difference.
in some cases, zoos are also rescuing animals, but they also do, like, they have, you know, conservation programs and breeding programs for animals that are endangered. So yes, you may be imprisoning the individual, but you're also trying to continue the species. So on an individual level, maybe not so good, but on a species level, where the, you know, the species may not survive.
The business model of zoos is not conservation. They are not buying land. There is precisely one tiny, on the Isle of Wight zoo that I know about, and I know lots of zoologists. I've had this discussion plenty of times. Zoos make money from the visitors and from the donations that they've set up for their trusts. They are not out buying land. In whatever country, even this country, doesn't matter, whatever country they are in, they're not buying the land to actually restore the environments where animals can live. They are
Yeah, but they do have breeding
purely
programs to try
right,
to
but
preserve some
breeding
of the genetic diversity of
right, but
you
for
know,
as long as they continue to remain imprisoned. The genetic diversity is not to put them back into the wild. There is no plan by the zoos to actually buy land and
yeah, in
recreate.
some cases that's not actually true. In any event, I was also interested in a vegan take on parasites.
Well, we need to take care of ourselves, and in terms of, to the extent possible and practicable, so going back to the definition, parasites within us, like if I have a parasite,
Yeah.
will I take medication? Yes, I will take medication. I will look after myself, and I will take medication. I've gotten vaccinated, and all those things. To the extent possible and practicable. If there is some way to have medicine that is vegan, that's great. If there's not, and I need it to live in this world and to continue my life, yes, I am going to take the medicine.
Okay, that kind of covers my next question, because I was interested in, you know, a lot of research, medical research is done on animals, and of course, pretty much
That's
any
different.
medication you would
yes.
take would have been, you know, tested on animals first.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And it would have been tested on animals. However, animal testing itself, 95%, I actually, in my first season of the podcast, I had Dr. Ayesha Akhtar, who is a co-founder of the Center for Contemporary Science. And she's a brain surgeon, and I mean, she's all sorts of things, super smart. And she has made it her life's goal to show how animal testing actually is obsolete. 95% of the animal testing fails in humans. So imagine, this is actually from something that she said. Imagine you were getting on an airplane, and the pilot said, "Hey folks, welcome to the flight. We have a 5% chance of making it alive to our destination. That's animal testing. So it is still something that we do, but it is something that we're beginning to move away from because there are other ways of testing medicines that are actually going to work for humans.
But you wouldn't avoid something just because it had been tested on animals.
Me personally, I would not, but there are some
Yeah.
people who don't take medication. I don't, because I think that we should continue to live. If you can live a healthy life and, and you need this medication, you continue to live. We live in as I always say, we live in a non-vegan capitalist world. We got to do the best we can.
Okay, and also I don't believe it's, well, I guess it depends on how you're, using the word animal, but not everything that we would call an animal has a central nervous system. There's a few things, like most do, of course, the vast majority, but there's a few things that don't. Like,
Sort of like certain mollusks and sponges.
Certain mollusks and sponges, yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? We don't know.
So
We
would
don't
you
need
consider
to eat
them more like plants
No,
for
I would
purposes
just
of being a vegan, or?
no. If they're considered an animal, I'm gonna stay away from them and let them be. Do I need to? Am I on like a place that all I can eat is a sponge, or I will die? Well, that's a different conversation because moral decisions in cases of dire emergency are never perfect, but I would leave them alone. There's plenty of other things we can do rather than always focus on how we can exploit the animal. If we turn it around and say, hey, wait a second, me and the animal, whatever it is, whether the animal has a partial nervous system or a full-on nervous system, if we say, hey, hold on a second, what would I do in a human context? Would I take advantage of this person? Would I, whatever? Would I exploit this person? And you say, you know what, maybe not, because I can go and do some other things. Opt to go and do other things. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about. Ultimately is taking ourselves out of the focus of the question, because we're always putting ourselves at the center. Take ourselves out of the center. And think about the world in a much more interconnected way, rather than how can I continue to do exactly what I've been doing without change. And that, to me, if I can leave anything with you tonight, is just start thinking about that. We're not the center. We're part of that tree of life that you use as the API symbol. We are part of a web. There isn't a chain. There is no such thing. That was also a creation of religion and politics. So that's the thing. How are we going to shift that conversation? It's not about what if. It's wait a second, why am I at the center? Why have I decided? Because it's a self-serving position. So that's what I hope to share.
Okay, that's okay. So I think this is my last question, I promise. But like obviously eating plants kills fewer animals, but it's impossible to do agriculture without killing like substantial amounts of animals, either intentionally or unintentionally. So I'm just wondering what the vegan take on that is.
That's actually a myth. There's lots of papers written about that. Most of the time, there's the like harvesting deaths and all of that. It's a big myth. There's really not that much.
Well,
there may
like
be a little bit.
Insects, for example, will eat your crops if you don't do something about that.
Absolutely, but the way we farm, we can probably do a lot to make sure that we have different kinds of crops so that you can attract insects to those crops rather than the central crops. But because of monoculture, we don't even have those practices anymore on a big scale. And actually, the other interesting thing is our soils are so depleted that even the mycological structure underneath the soils is very much lacking, whereas that could be it certainly was a super helpful relationship with the plants that could actually help us farm better. So yes, you can have,
It's just
if you're,
like even in flour, there's a regulation amount of insects you can have
Right.
in it, because if you're grinding up wheat, there's going to be,
Right.
you know, a certain amount of
right,
insects
and
ground
that's,
up. It's unavoidable.
right. Okay. So let's go back to the definition that was, I think, slide 2. So it was to the extent possible and practicable. So am I grinding wheat and there's like bugs that I don't see that are falling in there and that I'm grinding and I can't see them? Yes. Am I like hoovering down insects into the flour to purposely grind them up? No. So on one hand, one is a deliberate action and the other one is uh, an issue of existence. So if
Right.
there's,
So you make the
so
distinction between whether it's intentional or not.
well, of course you've got to. There is that, because you're also existing in a world where there's things around you that you may not be seeing. So if there's insects falling into your flour processing plant, maybe, perhaps, if we start taking the issue of animals more seriously, maybe there is actually some sort of way to put different kind of sealant or different kinds of screens or whatever, where the air ducts come into the big giant factories that make flour, because obviously I'm not making flour on a stone ground thing in a hut in my yard. These things are happening on a large scale. So maybe if we started to think about animals in a different way, perhaps we would start thinking about how we could avoid even these unnecessary entanglements, or
Okay.
to diminish them even
but
further.
let's say, for example, you've done your best to do things as well as you possibly can, and you're growing your beautiful crop, but you get some kind of infestation in something that's going to destroy your crop if you don't do something about it.
Well, yeah, again, dire situations and moral decisions are difficult. So you've got, hey, this is my crop. So you're living completely. Now, we do have a garden, and sometimes we do get infestation. Given that we don't have to rely on that to survive, we're just like, oh well, the cabbage moths win this time, and we just let it go. If we were dependent on that for our survival, then that's a different situation. Once again, to the extent possible and practicable. And all these things, these big moral dilemmas are not where we are. All of us here on
And
this Zoom, we're not
what
there.
would the vegan take on like an invasive species that comes in and kind of takes over be? How do you deal with that?
That's a very interesting question. And actually, the whole idea of invasive and non-native and so forth, so I've actually started to move away from those terms entirely, because they make very big assumptions of what who should be in a place or not, and why, and so forth. Generally, an invasive species, also quote unquote invasive species, is brought in by people for farming purposes or for hunting or for pleasure
Sure,
purposes.
but it's already
So
here. For example, the beetle that was boring into and killing elm trees, and they had to
right.
chop down all kinds of elm trees within a radius of the infected tree just to try and control
Heather,
the
this
spread.
has been a great set of questions, actually. You've been really thorough. But can we kind of move on? Yeah.
It's not often I have a vegan I can ask these questions
No,
of, but
actually,
sorry,
this
I don't mean
is,
to monopolize. I'll stop now.
this is really good. But like the time's getting on. That's all I'm. That's all I'm.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
I'm done.
but really,
Thank you very much for your
really
answers.
Yeah,
I
you
know what,
appreciate it.
Heather? Maybe keep your questions. Emily promised to do session number 2, right? So maybe you can.
Yeah, we're gonna. She's gonna come back.
That's actually a great idea, right, Emilia? So maybe you can.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
we have
Well,
more
Anyway,
time
thank,
then.
thank you so much. I know vegans, but I feel like I would annoy them if I, shut all these questions out. So
no,
I
it's always,
appreciate it very
it's,
much.
Yeah.
no, and I should say, I appreciate all the questions, and they've all been excellent. One of the most important things is to get a dialogue going and to have questions and to talk about these things. But I would also urge you, if you are interested in all this, to read our book, or I also cite a bunch of other authors that you could read. I would highly recommend Tom Regan. I would highly recommend Sherry Kolb, Gary Francione. Carol J. Adams. I would recommend reading them as well. And then, coming from that, and then having more questions, it would make it even more productive and enlightening for all.
Yeah, great.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it for both. Now, I do have some questions, but I would like to defer, first of all, to my gym buddy, all for one, one for all. And then I think Henry also had his hand up. Is that right, Henry?
Yes, Rick has had his hand up as
No,
well.
Rick is my gym buddy. So I'm
Oh, he's your gym buddy. Sorry, I didn't know.
And then, sorry, of course, people don't know that. And I think, Henry, you had your hand up, did you not?
I think so. I gotta check.
Yeah. So we'll move on to you next, if you don't mind. Yeah. Rick.
Okay, my question is, our planet is full of animal and plant carnivores. What makes us as a species special? And we have to try and limit our meat intake. Other primates like chimpanzees are hunters and killers also. What makes us special?
Well, we have choices. And maybe that is the only distinction between us and non-human animals, is that we can make certain moral choices, and lots of other animals don't, or can't, or make different ones. But we have supermarkets. We choose to impregnate a bunch of cows so that we can drink their secretions when we don't need to, because we had the secretions from our mothers. We as a species 10,000 years ago decided, oh, we're going to get a bunch of aurochs together and we're going to breed them to make them smaller so we can handle them and they won't kill us. We decided to do that. The aurochs really didn't. Lions, chimpanzees, they do their thing, but they don't make a moral choice. Lions aren't going to have the choice to go to the supermarket. We do. And that we make the choice. We make the choice to kill another human, and we consider that really bad. Animals.
Other species of animals do raise animals for food. Ants do that. They raise aphids.
Yes.
Milk, bring the food down into the nest.
But again, it's on a different scale. They're also not basically destroying their own world to do that. We are making the choices to do things that other animals don't have a choice. Like the ants and the aphids, they don't have the choices. That's who they are. That is how they exist. That's how they evolve. That's how they function. We have a choice. We have a choice to be different. We have a choice to be moral beings. We have a choice to not wage war on one another. We have a choice to wage war on one another. We have a lot of choices, and we make them every day. That's the big difference. That's the difference, if anything. And maybe in your view, maybe that making a choice says, well, I can do whatever I want because I can make a choice. If that's your view, that's a point of argument for sure.
There's a lot of evidence that other animals are just as just as sentient and able to make choices as us, like orcas. They have a language, they trap family groups, they do everything that we do, and they kill.
But they're not omnivores.
They are meat eater carnivores.
They're not correct. They're not omnivores. We are omnivores, meaning we
Yes.
can actually live by eating everything. So that means we're not exclusively forced to only eat one thing. Like, you know, gorillas are pretty much completely vegan because they pretty much just eat leaves, grasses, and all sorts of other plants. Sometimes there will be some insects thrown in because, well, the insects are on the leaves. You know, then you have alligators that eat fish and only eat fish. There's certain types of alligators that are river alligators and they only eat fish. Well, they only eat fish. We can eat fish, we can eat plants, we can eat a whole bunch of other things, seeds, nuts. We've learned to cook. Other animals have not learned to cook. So we're quite, in that way, different. And we've
Okay,
set up a whole system of laws and morals and ethics and philosophy to deal with one another. Orcas still have to do that. Maybe they will, if we give them a chance.
Sure. I think Henry left, and probably we're running out of time. And Emilia, so maybe one more question from Henry. And
Okay.
I have a little question after Henry, and then we're gonna wrap up the meeting today.
Okay.
And we have a session 2, so everyone who didn't have a chance, welcome to come to session 2. We're probably gonna go deeper and more. Thanks, Emilia.
Of course.
Okay, may I go ahead?
Yes.
I'm just curious, on what ground we can claim that animals have no ethical system? How do we know it? We know that only we have this kind of ethics that we apply in order to determine what to do. Why do we think that animals don't have it?
Well, they could, and in fact, cross-species cooperation is something that happens quite regularly, even beyond what we normally hear about. There will be a variety of animals who help one another in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's just the way they have evolved, like certain birds call out when they see the predators, and that call alerts the animals who are lower down in the trees, and then they make a different sound which alerts the deer, those types of animals, those different things. They may very well have a certain ethical framework,
Right.
but we certainly are the ones who are talking about it and have organized our human relations systems along those lines of having ethics and laws and moral systems.
Okay.
Whereas, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think like
it's also a bit contradictory, because why can't we say that? Why can't we think that animals behave according to their choices, according to their own ethical system? They choose to be carnivores because animals is much less violent and cruel than humans, I would say. I would say that the ethical system is higher than the ethical system of a human being, Homo sapiens, so to say. So, and they choose, well, they choose what they choose. They choose to be carnivores, they choose their relationship. This is what they choose.
well, no, they don't choose to be carnivores. That's like biology. But Steve actually makes a good point. There is a large literature on inequality aversion, and you may have seen it. There's actually in primates that works. I've seen the video of that, and it's really quite affecting. where the actual a little monkey, I forget which kind, but a little monkey, they got the basic fairness. They were like, this is unfair. Why is they were getting more, the other monkey was getting less, and they were going bananas. No pun intended. And yeah, actually, I also recommend Mark Beekoff's work. He's another person that you should read. He's quite excellent. Biology will dictate how you live in some ways. So some animals can only eat certain things, and that if they eat other things, they kind of will die. So there isn't a choice for the orcas to go to the supermarket and have lentils. That's not going to work for them.
So therefore we decided that biology of a human being dictates to eat vegetables and not to touch animal products. This is how
the biology of human beings is omnivore. So like that's pretty well established. So meaning we can eat, and we've talked about this before, we can eat everything. So we can be healthy eating a variety of things, meaning our evolution and our gut digests a variety of plants and animal sources. What we choose to do in 2023 is what really is at the crux of all of this. What we're choosing to do is we're choosing to continue to perpetrate a deeply unjust and unfair system on animals who have no choice and who we bring into the world, and we've created and we continue to exploit for our own purposes. That's the real crux. And we have placed ourselves at the center of that, and that it is that's quite the issue. That's the central problem.
Okay,
but Ala, I think you had
I want a historical question. You said that humans didn't ate meat before, and then they didn't eat meat before, then they started 10,000 years ago, and now we kind of, what is history about it?
Yeah, no. What I said was maybe there's a couple of different things. So I said that humans evolved much later than some animal species that are still currently with us. Then the other thing that I said was we started farming animals 10,000 years ago. So that's the difference. But
historically, people ate meat always, or just started? Do you know about it?
Yes, there is a lot of evidence that people mostly ate whatever they could gather. So it was mostly, because also hunting was very is very energy intensive. So if you had just a spear and a little knife, you had to run after your food, whereas you could just get food from the forest floor. It was much easier to gather the plants, and so prehistoric man, let's just use that very broadly, and I'm not, there's different ages. The prehistoric man basically ate primarily plants, and then there were forays into hunting and things like that. But what changed, that has changed humanity, was agriculture, and that was 10,000 years ago. And that's a fairly accepted, we became less nomadic as well as a species. We became less nomadic, more tied to the land. There is also there is some argument that also talks about how that 10,000 years ago, we started to get ideas of class, again, tied to land, tied to workers, and all of that. So that shift to agriculture very much set in motion our development as we are today. I mean, but 10,000 years in a historical sense is not a lot of time.
Okay.
Thank
you, Emilia. It was fascinating and practical conversation. I think it's very current and popular in the media, in the science, on TV, in the supermarkets. We have whole sessions now.
Yeah.
So they all support your point, but it's still philosophical discussion. I don't think you convince everyone in this group, but you have
No,
chance.
but there's plenty to read more.
No, I mean, you have one more chance, and they may rethink. I'm pretty sure we will see you in few months, and everyone will rethink, prepare more questions, of course, and be ready, please. And of course, big thank you for you and to find time and energy to present. It's really very, very useful, say at least.
Thank you
So,
very much. Absolutely
yes,
grateful
good.
and delighted to have this opportunity.